The year is 1970. The median price of a home is a mere $17,000, and it takes the average person just 3 years to save up enough money for a 10% down payment on a home. Fast forward to 2023 and the world has dramatically changed. Today, the median home price stands at $430,000, and it takes the average worker 21 years to save up enough money for just a 10% down payment on a loan for a house. The Housing Affordability Index is at a lower level than it was in 2007, right before the housing bubble burst. This index measures the average family's ability to afford a down payment on a home, and it actually sits at the lowest level since this index was created. The heart of this issue has multiple root causes, some of which are extremely concerning, but let me start off by saying this is very different to the 2008 housing collapse. Between 2006 and 2010, we saw the number of foreclosure filings go up almost tenfold. In fact, 2008 is also known as the foreclosure crisis. An unprecedented number of people weren't able to make their loan payments, so bank had to come and seize their properties, which is known as a foreclosure. But today, the number of foreclosures is at a historically low level. The issue in 2023 is not about people losing their homes, it's about the inability for the average person to become a homeowner in the first place. The University of Michigan conducts a survey on how people feel about buying a home, and today it shows us people believe it's the worst possible moment to be buying a house. For comparison, this is what people thought about buying a home right before the housing crash in 2008. So the buying conditions for homes today are much worse today than they were right at the top of the housing bubble. One obvious reason for this is the rising cost of new mortgages. The average monthly payment on a new mortgage has reached $3,000 in 2023. That's triple the amount from 2012, which immediately makes buying a home more expensive. People see the monthly mortgage payment that they're going to have to make. There's no way they could possibly make that payment, and so no way they could afford that home. That's a direct result of mortgage rates moving up from around 2.5% to now 7.7%, making mortgages around 3 times more expensive. So are high mortgages simply the reason why housing is unaffordable in the United States today? That would be a grotesque oversimplification of what's actually happening. The low rates we saw in 2021 after the pandemic are just as much to blame for the unaffordability crisis that we see today in America. Those low interest rates that we saw during the pandemic fueled around $5.8 trillion in mortgage refinancings. That's a higher volume of mortgage refinancing than we saw in 2003 at the heart of the speculative housing boom. This means a historical number of people locked in new mortgages on their homes at very low rates. With mortgage rates now at 7.7%, anyone selling their home would be giving up on those very cheap mortgages. And that explains one of the fundamental problems of the housing affordability crisis. Nobody is selling their house. The number of existing homes that are available for sale is currently at an all-time low. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, but there are new homes being built, right? Yes, there's around 1.3 million new housing constructions that start every month. So there are new homes that are coming onto the market. However, if we look at the average number of new housing constructions per month since the 1950s, that's higher than the current rate of new constructions. In fact, since 2009, the number of new housing constructions has consistently been below average. Home builders were traumatized during the housing crisis in 2008. They had built too many homes during the speculative period of the housing bubble, and when the bubble burst, nobody wanted to buy all the homes that they had built. Many home building companies went bankrupt during that period and took over a decade to really start building homes again. Home builders did regain some confidence between 2019 and 2021 when mortgage rates were very low, but then they started to face a new problem: rising construction costs. A direct byproduct of the high inflation that we've seen over the past couple of years. The cost to build a home rose by 50% from 2020 until now, an unprecedented rate of increase. That makes it less interesting for home builders to start new projects. So not only are less homes being built than the historical average, but the ones that are being built will also be more expensive. All of this limits the supply of homes on the market. When you have less supply, the market readjusts to the new supply and demand dynamic. As a result, the quantity of homes being sold decreases while their price increases. So this naturally puts upwards pressure on home prices, leading to an affordability crisis. Fortunately, population growth in the United States is expected to start leveling off in the coming decades, and that could relieve some pressure off the housing market. Between 1990 and 2010, we saw quite an impressive growth of urban population, but that's going to slow down from here. You can see, for example, China's urban population growth in comparison is substantially higher, explaining why Chinese real estate has been yielding ridiculous returns. But lower population growth in the United States could, over time, relieve some of the pressure that we see in the housing market today. But that's where we run into the next fundamental issue with the housing market: institutional ownership of homes. In 2023, a record 18% of the total housing market share is owned by investors. That's a huge leap from the 6% ownership in 2001. It's estimated that institutions will own 7.6 million homes by 2030. This means they would control 40% of the housing market. Housing is, of course, a great investment opportunity for institutional investors. It provides them with diversification for their portfolios, rents give a steady return on investment, and homes are assets that generally retain their value over time. These institutions also have an advantage compared to the average American: billions of dollars in capital. Americans, on the other hand, need to balance their housing budget against the cost of other essentials like food and transportation. Since 2020, food prices in the US have jumped 20%, and transportation costs have risen by 35%. Food and transportation alone make up a third of household spending. So as these costs rise, the average American's budget gets squeezed, forcing them to reconsider other expenses, like, for example, buying a home or even saving up money to buy a home. And this is really the nail in the coffin when it comes to the housing crisis we see today in America. People can't put money aside to buy a home. People's savings relative to their income has plunged to a staggering 0%, a level comparable to what we saw in the depth of the financial crisis. In the 1970s, people's net savings represented over 10% of their total income. So that means the number of years that it takes for the average person to save up enough money for a down payment on a home went from 3 to 5 years in the 1970s to around 20 years today. Okay, but there are more affordable homes in America, right? You're right, around 60,000 homes were sold for under $100,000 in the last 12 months just on Zillow. So affordable housing does exist in the United States. The only problem is that banks won't provide loans to people who want these homes. Loan applications below $70,000 face a denial rate of around 50%. That's nearly twice the rejection rate for loans above $150,000. So cheap homes do exist, but if you want to buy them, you're going to need to pay all cash because you're not going to get a loan from banks. Of course, the people who actually need affordable housing usually aren't able to do that, meaning institutions are more likely to scoop up affordable housing rather than individuals. All of these factors completely sideline the average American from investing in real estate, and that could be a big problem for wealth creation in the United States. Keeping cash inevitably leads to a loss of purchasing power over time. $1 has lost about 87% of its purchasing power since the 1970s if you had just kept that under your mattress. Meanwhile, home prices have gone up 20-fold. That's a direct result of the big urban population boom we saw in the US between 1970 and today. But there are significant opportunities in other parts of the world. Take India, for example, where population growth is projected to rise exponentially over the next decades, much higher than even the highest levels of population growth we've seen in the US. It might not be easy to invest in Indian real estate, but this is an example of massive growth potential in other parts of the world, which can be accessed through the stock market. Being able to present these opportunities to you wherever they may be is one of the key reasons why we founded the Game of Trades investment service.